The morning sun shone through the wide glass windows of the large house, filling the room with golden light. The house stood quietly on a hill, surrounded by green lawns and tall trees that moved gently with the wind. Inside, everything was clean and carefully placed, the kind of order that only comes when someone pays close attention to every small detail. The man who owned the house had everything most people only dream of. He had money, a successful business, and the kind of respect that comes from years of hard work. But even with all of that, he often felt something missing in his life. Since his wife passed away years ago, the house had become a silent place. The laughter that once filled the rooms was gone, replaced by the ticking of clocks and the soft sound of shoes on marble floors. Only one person kept the house alive: his maid. She was a quiet, middle-aged woman who had been working there for nearly a year. She never spoke too much, never asked unnecessary questions, and always carried a gentle smile that seemed to calm everyone around her. Every morning she would come in, clean the rooms, prepare his meals, and make sure everything stayed perfect. The man respected her for her honesty and hard work, but deep down, he sometimes wondered if her kindness was real. He had heard stories from his wealthy friends about how even the most trusted workers had stolen from them when they had the chance. These stories stayed in his mind. He trusted his maid, yet a small part of him whispered doubts. Was she really as honest as she seemed? Would she be the same if she saw a chance to take something valuable? That question began to grow inside him until one day he decided to find out for himself. It was a bright Saturday morning when he planned the test. He was supposed to attend a business meeting in the city, but instead he decided to stay home and pretend to leave. He wanted to see what his maid would do if she thought he wasn't there. That morning, as he dressed in his suit, an uneasy feeling filled his chest. He wasn't proud of what he was about to do, but curiosity had taken over. After breakfast, he walked into his study. A large room filled with shelves of books, a heavy desk, and in the corner, a tall safe made of dark steel. Inside the safe were several stacks of cash, important documents, and a few expensive watches that had belonged to his late wife. Usually he kept it locked, but that morning he turned the handle, leaving it slightly open so that the edge of the money could be seen. It was enough to catch anyone's attention. He then placed a small camera on the bookshelf hidden behind a row of books. It faced the safe perfectly. He checked the angle, pressed record, and took a deep breath. When his maid arrived, she greeted him politely as always. "Good morning, sir," she said softly. He nodded with a smile, pretending everything was normal. "Good morning. I have to go out for a few hours," he said. "Just the usual work. Make sure the house is clean before I return." She smiled and nodded. "Of course, sir." He picked up his keys, walked to the door, and stepped outside. But instead of driving away, he quietly walked around the side of the house and slipped into the guest room, where another small monitor was connected to the camera feed. He sat down, his heart beating faster than usual. He felt like he was doing something wrong, but he told himself this was just a test, a way to make sure his trust wasn't misplaced. Minutes passed slowly. The maid started cleaning the kitchen, then moved to the living room. Everything looked normal. She hummed softly as she worked, dusting the furniture and wiping the glass tables. Then she entered the study. The man leaned closer to the screen, holding his breath. She walked in carrying a small duster and a cloth. Her eyes moved around the room as she began dusting the shelves. When she reached the safe, she noticed the door slightly open. For a moment she froze. She stared at it quietly, then stepped closer. Her expression was calm, but her eyes showed surprise. The man's heartbeat grew louder in his chest. The maid leaned forward slightly and saw the cash inside. She didn't touch it. Instead, she stood there for several seconds, then took a slow step back. She looked toward the door, then back at the safe again, almost as if she was thinking about something deeply. Then she sighed. She pulled out a small notebook from her apron pocket and wrote something down. After a few seconds, she tore a piece of paper and placed it gently on the desk beside the safe. Then she closed her notebook, turned around, and continued cleaning the room. The man sat in silence, staring at the monitor. He couldn't see what she had written, but his curiosity grew stronger. After a few more minutes, she finished cleaning, turned off the lights, and left the study. He stayed in the guest room for another hour, giving her enough time to finish her chores. Then he finally walked out, pretending to return home from his meeting. The maid met him at the door, smiling politely as always. "Welcome back, sir," she said. "I've cleaned everything. Would you like some tea?" He smiled back, trying to hide the guilt growing inside him. "Yes, please," he said softly. While she went to the kitchen, he walked straight to his study. The room looked exactly the same as before. Nothing was moved, nothing was missing. The safe was still slightly open, untouched. On the desk, he saw the small folded note she had left earlier. He reached for it and opened it slowly. Her handwriting was neat and careful. The message read, "Sir, I noticed your safe was open this morning. I didn't touch anything, but I was worried someone else might see it. Please make sure to close it next time. Money is valuable, but trust is more precious. Take care." He read the note twice, then a third time. His hands trembled slightly. He sat down on the chair, feeling something heavy in his chest. All morning he had doubted her. He had set up a trap to catch her doing something wrong. And instead, she had shown him the kind of honesty that most people only talk about. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the note, realizing how deeply wrong his doubts had been. When she brought in his tea, he thanked her quietly and didn't mention the note. He didn't know what to say yet. All he could think about was how easy it had been for him to suspect someone who had done nothing but good. That night, when the house became quiet again, he went back to the guest room to review the camera footage. He watched her every move carefully, from the moment she entered the study to the moment she left. Nothing about her looked forced or fake. She didn't even glance around to see if anyone was watching. She just noticed the safe, left the note, and continued her work as if it was the most natural thing in the world. He paused the video at the moment she looked at the safe and whispered something softly. He couldn't hear it clearly, but her face showed calmness, not temptation. He turned off the screen and sat there for a long time, thinking. The test he thought would expose someone else had actually exposed him. His impatience, his lack of faith, his loneliness. He realized that trust wasn't something to test. It was something to build. Later that night, he walked into his study again. The note was still on his desk. He picked it up and placed it inside the safe, right beside his late wife's photograph. Then he locked the safe gently and whispered to himself, "You were right. Money isn't everything." As he turned off the lights, he caught a glimpse of his reflection in the window. For the first time in a long while, he felt both humbled and grateful. Somewhere deep inside, he knew this moment would change how he saw people forever. And while the rest of the world slept outside his walls, inside that quiet house, something precious had been restored. Not the wealth he owned, but the trust he had almost lost. The next morning, the house felt different. The man woke up early, but instead of thinking about work or checking his phone like he usually did, he found himself staring out the window for a long time. The sound of birds outside mixed softly with the distant hum of the city. He felt lighter somehow, though his mind still carried a quiet guilt. He couldn't stop thinking about the note the maid had written. Her words kept echoing in his mind. Money is valuable, but trust is more precious. It wasn't just what she said, but how simply and sincerely she said it. There was no anger, no sarcasm, not even a hint of suspicion. Just care. When she arrived that morning, he greeted her with more warmth than usual. She smiled politely as always and went straight to her work. Watching her move quietly around the house, he wondered what kind of life she had lived to carry such peace inside her. She never seemed rushed or bothered. There was a calm strength about her that he hadn't noticed before. He wanted to thank her for what she did, but he didn't know how to start that conversation. How could he admit that he had doubted her honesty and even tested her behind her back? The thought made him uncomfortable, so instead, he just tried to be kind in small ways, asking if she wanted tea, giving her extra time to rest, or simply saying thank you more often. But she didn't seem to notice the difference. She continued working with the same quiet dedication as always. That evening, he decided to watch the video again. There was something about it that pulled him back. He replayed the part where she saw the safe and hesitated. This time, he noticed something small he had missed before. Right after writing the note, she had picked up a framed photograph from his desk and wiped it carefully with her cleaning cloth. It was a photo of his late wife smiling warmly at the camera. The maid looked at the picture for a long moment and whispered something softly before putting it back exactly where it belonged. He turned up the volume, trying to hear her words, but they were too quiet. Still, her face said enough. It wasn't curiosity or pity, it was respect. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the screen, feeling a lump rise in his throat. It had been years since anyone mentioned his wife or even looked at her picture that way. People avoided bringing her up, afraid it would remind him of pain. But this simple woman, who knew nothing of his past, had shown more empathy than any of his so-called friends. The next day, when she arrived, he decided to talk to her. After breakfast, he called her to the study. She looked a little nervous, perhaps wondering if she had done something wrong. He gestured for her to sit, but she hesitated, as if unsure if it was appropriate. "It's all right," he said softly. "Please sit." She sat carefully on the edge of the chair, folding her hands in her lap. "I wanted to thank you," he began, "for the note you left yesterday. I saw it and I just wanted to say that it meant a lot." She gave a small smile. "Oh, that's all right, sir. I just thought you might not have noticed the safe was open." He hesitated, unsure how to continue. "Yes, I know. But you could have done something else. You could have taken advantage." "You didn't." Her smile faded a little. "Sir, I don't take what isn't mine. It's not just about honesty. It's about peace. If I ever stole something, I might have money for a while, but I'd lose my peace forever. And that's not worth it." Her words were simple, but they struck him deeply. He nodded slowly, not trusting himself to speak for a moment. Then, wanting to change the mood, he asked, "Would you like some tea? I'll make it this time." She looked surprised, then smiled faintly. "You don't have to, sir." "I insist," he said, standing up. A few minutes later, they sat in the kitchen, sipping tea together, something that had never happened before. It felt strange at first, but also natural. She told him about her early morning walks, about how she liked watching the sunrise before coming to work. She said it made her feel alive, even when life was difficult. He listened quietly, realizing how little he actually knew about the person who had been helping him every single day. For the first time in a long time, he felt a kind of connection that wasn't based on money, work, or responsibility. It was human. Over the next few weeks, the atmosphere in the house began to change. The man smiled more. He started eating at the dining table instead of alone in his study. Sometimes he'd ask her opinion about simple things. Which flowers looked better in the living room, or what color the new curtains should be. She always answered politely, never overstepping, but her calm voice brought comfort to the silent house. One afternoon, he decided to give her a day off and a small envelope with extra money. She looked at it, then shook her head. "I can't take this, sir," she said softly. "You already pay me more than enough." "It's just a bonus," he said. "You've been working hard," she smiled kindly. "I appreciate it, but please don't feel you owe me anything. I just do my job." That night after she left, he sat in his study, staring again at the same safe that had started it all. He thought about how much he had learned from someone who owned nothing compared to him. She had no fancy car, no expensive clothes, no grand lifestyle, yet she carried something he couldn't buy: inner peace. Days turned into weeks. One evening, as the man sat reading in his study, he heard quiet footsteps. The maid stood by the door holding a small basket. "Sir, I brought you some food from home," she said shyly. "It's a simple dish, but I thought you might like to try it." He looked at her, surprised. "You didn't have to do that." "I wanted to," she said with a smile. "It's something my mother used to make." He took the basket, opened it, and the smell immediately brought warmth to the room. It reminded him of something, not the food itself, but the feeling of being cared for. He hadn't felt that in years. They sat quietly as he ate, and she talked softly about her mother, how she taught her to work hard, be kind, and never let greed take over. After she left that night, he sat for a long time thinking about everything she said. It was strange. The woman who dusted his furniture and mopped his floors had become someone he deeply respected. Not because of what she did, but because of who she was. One morning, while going through some papers, he found an old photograph of himself and his wife on their wedding day. They looked young, hopeful, and happy. He realized that before his wife passed, he had been more like the man in that photo, trusting, kind, and open-hearted. Somewhere along the way, he had become cautious and cold. The maid, without even knowing it, had reminded him of the person he used to be. That day, when she came in, he asked her to sit again. "I want to tell you something," he said. "A few weeks ago, when I left the safe open, it wasn't an accident. I did it on purpose. Her eyes widened slightly, but she didn't interrupt. "I wanted to test your honesty," he continued quietly. "I'm ashamed to say it, but I didn't know if I could trust anyone anymore. I set up a camera. I watched everything. And what I saw, it humbled me." She sat still, her face calm but her eyes soft. He continued, "I saw the way you looked at the safe. I saw the note you left. And I saw how you treated my wife's picture. You didn't know anyone was watching, and yet you acted with more integrity than I've seen in years." For a long moment, she said nothing. Then she smiled faintly and said, "Sir, it's all right. I understand. It's hard to trust people these days. I've been in your place before, hurt by those I trusted. I don't blame you." He felt his throat tighten. Her forgiveness came so easily, without judgment. "You're a good person," he said softly. She shook her head. "I just try to do what's right. That's all." He wanted to say more, but words didn't seem enough. He simply nodded and thanked her. After she left the room, he sat alone for a long time, thinking about how her kindness had changed him. The test that started from doubt had turned into something much deeper, a lesson in humanity. And as the evening sunlight filled the room once again, the man finally understood that real wealth wasn't measured by the money in his safe, but by the people who carried honesty in their hearts. After that honest conversation, something changed between them. It wasn't spoken or planned, but the air around the house felt different. The man felt lighter, calmer, and oddly more at peace. For years, his mansion had been quiet in a lonely way, but now that silence seemed softer, warmer. The presence of his maid brought a kind of comfort he hadn't realized he needed. She continued her work as before, cleaning the rooms, preparing meals, and keeping the house running smoothly. But now, there was a gentle understanding between them. He didn't see her as just a maid anymore. He saw her as a person who had taught him something priceless, something that no business deal or fortune could ever buy. One afternoon, as he was sitting in his study, he found himself thinking about the past again. He opened the drawer where he had placed her note. He read it once more slowly, letting every word sink in. The handwriting was neat and steady, and the message still touched him as deeply as it did the first time. He then looked at the photograph of his wife beside the note. He realized that if she were alive, she would have admired this woman's honesty too. His wife had always believed that true kindness still existed, even in a world full of greed and selfishness. For a long time he had stopped believing that, but now, because of one woman's integrity, he could feel his wife's spirit again, gentle, hopeful, and full of light. Over the next few weeks, their bond quietly grew. He would sometimes join her in the kitchen and help cut vegetables, something he had never done before. She would laugh softly at the way he held the knife awkwardly, or how he tried to make tea but ended up spilling sugar everywhere. Those moments, though small, made the house come alive again. He also started noticing the small details about her life. Her clothes were simple and old, but always clean and pressed. She walked to work every morning, no matter how hot or cold it was. She never complained, not even when she was tired. He once offered to send his driver to pick her up, but she politely refused, saying the walk helped her clear her mind. It made him wonder what kind of life she returned to after leaving his house each evening. Did she live alone? Did she have a family waiting for her? He realized he didn't know, and that thought stayed with him. One evening, he decided to ask her. She was finishing up her chores when he called her to sit for a moment. "I hope you don't mind me asking," he said gently, "but do you live alone?" She looked surprised, but she nodded. "Yes, sir. I have a small place on the other side of town." "No family?" he asked softly. She hesitated for a second, then said, "I had a son once. He passed away a few years ago." Her voice was calm, but there was a sadness hidden behind it. He froze. I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I didn't know," she gave a faint smile. "It's all right. He was young, but he was kind. I try to live in a way that would make him proud." Her words broke something open inside him. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was heavy with shared pain, yet filled with understanding. That night, after she left, he couldn't stop thinking about her words. He knew what it meant to lose someone you love. He had lost his wife, and that pain never truly faded. But the way she carried her sorrow in with quiet strength and grace made him realize how much courage she had. The next morning, he made a decision. He went to his office and told his assistant to clear his schedule for the day. Then he drove to a small market on the edge of town. He remembered something she once mentioned about liking flowers, so he bought a few potted plants, simple ones with green leaves and tiny white blooms. He brought them home and placed them near the kitchen window where she often worked. When she arrived that afternoon, she noticed them immediately. Her eyes brightened. "Oh, these are beautiful," she said softly. He smiled. "I remembered you said you liked plants. I thought they might make the kitchen look a little friendlier." She touched the leaves gently. "Thank you, sir." "They do." After that day, she began taking care of the plants every morning, watering them, trimming the leaves, and talking to them quietly while she worked. The man would sometimes stand in the doorway watching her with a faint smile. It amazed him how such small things, a few plants, a shared cup of tea, a kind word, could bring so much warmth into a place that once felt cold. Weeks passed peacefully, but one afternoon, while reviewing some old files in his study, he stumbled upon an envelope filled with bills. It was a small amount compared to his wealth, but it reminded him of something important. The people who worked for him every day, unseen and often underpaid. He realized that his maid had never once asked for a raise or complained about money. She just did her work quietly, without expectation. That thought stayed with him. Later that evening, when she was about to leave, he called her and handed her a small envelope. She looked confused. "What is this?" she asked. "It's a bonus," he said simply. "You've been working hard and I want you to have it." She shook her head immediately. "Sir, I can't take that. You already pay me fairly." "It's not about payment," he said softly. "It's my way of saying thank you. For everything." She hesitated, then smiled faintly and accepted it. "You're very kind," she said quietly. After she left, he sat in his study, thinking again about how much she had changed his perspective. For years, he had measured people by their usefulness, by what they could offer or how loyal they were in business. But now he saw that the real measure of a person wasn't what they had, but who they were when no one was watching. The next day, he decided to visit the part of town where she lived. He didn't tell her, of course. He didn't want to invade her privacy, but something inside him wanted to understand the life she came from. He drove through narrow streets until he reached a small neighborhood filled with tiny houses and market stalls. He didn't know which one was hers, but he saw women who looked just like her, simple, hardworking, moving through life quietly but with purpose. He didn't stay long. As he drove back home, he felt humbled. He realized that he had lived in a world far removed from people like her. People who worked tirelessly, not for ambition, but for survival and dignity. And yet, those were the people who carried the strongest hearts. That evening, when she arrived, he greeted her warmly and asked about her day. She smiled and told him that the plants were growing well and that she had brought some homemade bread. They shared it over tea, and he found himself genuinely enjoying her company. As the evening sunlight filled the kitchen, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Peace. Not the peace that comes from wealth or success, but the quiet kind that comes from human connection. Later that night, as he locked up the house, his eyes fell once again on the old safe. It still sat quietly in the corner of his study, no longer a symbol of suspicion, but a reminder of everything he had learned. He touched it gently and smiled to himself. He realized that the test he had once created to measure another person's honesty had turned into a test of his own heart. And in that test, it was she, the humble maid, who had shown him the true meaning of trust, kindness, and grace. From that day forward, the house didn't feel like a lonely mansion anymore. It felt like a home again. The silence was still there, but it wasn't empty. It was peaceful, filled with gratitude, quiet laughter, and a friendship that grew stronger with each passing day. And as the man stood by the window, watching the sun set behind the trees, he thought to himself that maybe life had given him a second chance, not to gain more, but to finally understand what really mattered. Days turned into weeks, and the bond between the man and his maid continued to grow stronger, though neither of them ever said it out loud. There was now an unspoken understanding between them, a quiet friendship that didn't need words. She worked with the same care and dedication as always, but her presence no longer felt like that of an employee. It felt like family. Every morning when she arrived, she would bring a soft, calm energy into the house. The man had started to wait for that moment. The sound of her footsteps, the gentle way she greeted him, the way she made tea with exact timing so that it was never too strong or too weak. For a long time, he hadn't realized how much such small things could matter. One rainy afternoon, the weather turned cold and the sound of thunder rolled over the hills. The man was in his study reading while she was cleaning the hallway. A sudden flash of lightning made the lights flicker, and then for a moment everything went dark. She came to the study with a candle. "The power went out," she said softly. "But I lit some candles in the kitchen." He smiled. "Thank you. You always think ahead." She placed the candle on his desk. The soft flame cast a warm glow on the walls, and for the first time, the large study didn't feel empty. The two of them sat quietly, listening to the rain. After a few minutes, he spoke. "You know," he said, "this house used to be full of people. Friends, family, laughter. But after my wife passed away, everyone drifted away. I got used to silence. Now it doesn't feel so heavy anymore. I guess that's because of you." She looked at him with gentle eyes. "Sometimes silence just needs company to feel peaceful," she said. Her words touched him deeply. There was so much wisdom in her simplicity. She didn't try to sound wise. She just spoke from her heart, and somehow it always made sense. When the power came back, she went back to her work. But that evening stayed with him. For the first time in years, he didn't feel alone. A few days later, he noticed she wasn't her usual self. Her smile was still there, but her eyes looked tired. He asked if something was wrong, but she shook her head. "I'm fine, sir," she said politely. But he could see she wasn't. That night, he decided to talk to her again. When she finished her work and was about to leave, he stopped her at the door. "Please," he said gently, "if something is troubling you, you can tell me. Maybe I can help." She hesitated. Her fingers tightened around the strap of her bag. After a long pause, she said quietly, "It's my rent. The owner of the house where I live is selling the building. I have to move out soon, but I don't know where to go yet." The man frowned. "Did you find another place?" "Not yet," she said softly. "It's difficult to find something safe and affordable. But I'll manage, sir. I always do." Her calmness amazed him again. Even in difficulty, she spoke without fear or complaint. He wanted to offer help immediately, but he didn't want to make her uncomfortable. He knew she was proud and valued her independence. So he simply said, "If you need any help, please don't hesitate to ask." "Thank you," she replied with a faint smile. "That means a lot." That night, the man couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about her situation. She had given so much of herself, her time, her honesty, her kindness, and yet she lived with such little comfort. It didn't seem fair. By morning, he had made up his mind. The next day, while she was cleaning, he quietly made a few calls. He spoke with a real estate agent and arranged to buy a small, beautiful house not far from his own. It wasn't grand or luxurious, but it was cozy, with a small garden and bright windows. He asked the agent to prepare everything in her name. A few days later, everything was ready. But he didn't tell her yet. He wanted to wait for the right moment. A moment when she would truly understand why he was doing it. Not as a gift out of pity, but as gratitude for what she had brought into his life. Meanwhile, the days went on as usual. She came to work and the rhythm of the house continued. The smell of fresh tea in the mornings, the sound of her cleaning, the quiet peace that had now replaced the old emptiness. One evening, as the sun began to set, he asked her to come to the living room. She looked a little nervous, thinking perhaps she had done something wrong, but when she saw his calm smile, she relaxed. "I need to talk to you about something," he said. "Of course, sir," she said, folding her hands politely. He looked at her for a long moment before speaking. "You remember the day I left the safe open?" She nodded quietly. "That day I thought I was testing your honesty, but I realize now it wasn't just you I was testing. I was testing myself, my ability to trust, my faith in goodness. And you reminded me that there are still honest people in this world." She smiled faintly but didn't speak. He continued, "Since that day, you've done more for me than you can imagine. You've brought peace back into this house. You've reminded me what kindness looks like. I'll always be grateful for that." She looked down, a little embarrassed. "You've been very kind to me too, sir." He shook his head gently. "No, you've been the teacher here, not me." Then he handed her a small envelope. She looked at it, confused. "What's this?" she asked softly. "Something that belongs to you," he said. She She opened it and found a single key inside, along with a folded piece of paper. As she read it, her hands began to tremble. It was a legal document and the ownership papers for the small house he had bought for her. She looked up at him in shock. "Sir, what is this?" "It's your new home," he said simply. "You don't have to worry about rent anymore. It's in your name." Tears welled up in her eyes. She shook her head, unable to believe it. "No, sir. I can't accept this. It's too much. I can't." He stepped closer and said gently, "You can and you must. This isn't payment. This is gratitude. You've given me something I lost a long time ago. Faith in people. You reminded me that not everything in this world can be bought. You taught me that kindness still exists. This is the least I can do." Tears began to roll down her cheeks. She tried to speak but couldn't. Finally, she whispered, "No one has ever done anything like this for me." He smiled warmly. "You deserve it. You've worked hard all your life without expecting anything in return. Let this house be a reminder that good people are seen, even when they think they're invisible." She covered her face with her hands and cried softly. He didn't say anything more, he just let her take her time. When she finally looked up, her eyes were red, but her smile was brighter than he had ever seen. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I don't have words." "You don't need words," he replied. "Your honesty already said everything." That night after she left, he sat by the window looking out at the stars. For the first time in years, he felt completely at peace. The house around him felt alive again, not because of wealth or luxury, but because of something real and pure. The next morning, she returned as usual, though her eyes still showed traces of emotion. She thanked him again, but he simply waved it off, saying, "Let's have some tea." They sat together, sipping tea in comfortable silence, and for the first time they both realized something beautiful. The lines between employer and employee had faded. What remained was a genuine bond built on respect, trust and kindness, and somewhere deep inside, both of them knew that this connection was one of the rarest things in the world. A friendship born not out of convenience or need, but out of the simplest and truest parts of being human. The weeks that followed were filled with quiet joy. The woman moved into her new home, a small but beautiful place with sunlight pouring through every window and a tiny garden she could finally call her own. She had never imagined owning a house, let alone one given to her out of gratitude and kindness. Every morning when she woke up, she would stand near the window, look outside, and whisper a small prayer of thanks, not just for the house, but for the man who believed in her goodness. She continued to work at his house, though now things felt different. There was no distance between them anymore. They often shared tea and small talks, and sometimes he would tell her stories from his youth, about the struggles he faced before becoming wealthy, about the mistakes he made, and the people he had lost along the way. She listened with quiet respect, never judging, always understanding. He had spent most of his life surrounded by people who cared for his money more than they cared for him. But she was different. She didn't see him as a millionaire. She saw him as a person, someone who was lonely, someone who needed kindness. That made all the difference. One day, while she was cleaning the study, she noticed him sitting by the window, lost in thought. His usually calm face looked tired. She asked softly, "Are you feeling all right, sir?" He smiled faintly. "Just a little tired. Getting old, I suppose," she laughed lightly. "You still look strong to me," he chuckled, shaking his head. "I wish my doctor thought the same," she frowned. "Did something happen?" He sighed. "Nothing serious. Just the usual. The doctor says I should rest more and stop worrying so much. But you know me. I've spent my whole life worrying." She smiled. "Then maybe it's time to rest. You've done enough for everyone else. Let life take care of you for a while." Her words stayed with him. He realized she was right. For years he had been chasing goals, building companies and collecting wealth, but none of it had given him peace. Yet ever since she entered his life, everything had changed. She had reminded him that real wealth wasn't in gold or property. It was in people, in honesty and kindness. A few days later, he called his lawyer and made some important changes to his will. He didn't tell anyone about it, not even her. He didn't do it out of guilt or to prove anything. He simply wanted to leave something meaningful behind, a reminder that good deeds should be remembered. Life went on peacefully. She took care of the house with the same love and care as always, and he spent most of his time reading, gardening, and enjoying the calm he had once thought he'd never find again. But time has its own plans. One cold morning, she arrived at the house as usual. The sky was gray and a chilly wind moved through the trees. She rang the bell, but there was no answer. She tried again. Still nothing. Worried, she used her spare key to open the door and stepped inside. The house was unusually quiet. She walked through the hallway, calling his name softly. There was no response. Finally, she went to his bedroom. He was lying peacefully in bed, his eyes closed as if he were sleeping. She stepped closer, gently touched his hand, and it was cold. Her heart sank. Tears filled her eyes as she realized he was gone. For a long time, she stood there silently, unable to move. The man who had changed her life, who had shown her that goodness still existed, had quietly left the world in his sleep. There was no pain on his face, just calmness, as though he had finally found peace. The next few days passed like a blur. The lawyer handled the arrangements, and only a small group of people attended his funeral, mostly distant relatives and a few old friends. She stood quietly at the back, holding a single white flower. Her eyes never left the coffin as it was lowered into the ground. When it was over, she whispered softly, "Thank you for everything," and placed the flower on the fresh soil. After the funeral, the lawyer asked her to come to his office. She assumed it was about closing up the household matters. When she arrived, the lawyer handed her a sealed envelope. "He left this for you," he said. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened it. Inside was a handwritten letter. The familiar handwriting made her eyes fill with tears even before she read the first line. "My dear friend," the letter began. "If you're reading this, it means my journey has ended. But I want you to know something. You brought light back into my life when I thought it was gone forever. You reminded me what it means to trust, to care, and to believe in goodness. You may think you were just a maid, but to me you were hope. You were family. Thank you for showing me what real wealth looks like." She wiped her tears and continued reading. "I have left something for you, not out of charity, but out of gratitude. Inside my safe, you'll find one last thing. Something I hope will help you live the peaceful life you deserve." She quickly returned to the house. The safe that once tested her honesty now stood in front of her again. But this time, her hand shook as she opened it. Inside, there were no stacks of cash or gold bars, only a small velvet box and another note. She opened the box and found a gold locket inside. It was simple but beautiful. Inside the locket was a small photograph of him and her, taken one afternoon in the garden without her realizing it. The note inside the safe read, "For the person who became the heart of this home." There were also documents. As she looked through them, her tears fell freely. He had transferred a large part of his savings into her name, along with ownership of the house she worked in. But what touched her most wasn't the money. It was his words at the end of the letter. "Use this gift to help others the way you helped me. Let kindness continue. That will be my greatest reward." She sat on the floor of the study, holding the letter against her chest, and cried quietly. It wasn't the loss of money or work that broke her heart. It was the loss of someone who truly saw her for who she was. Weeks later, she fulfilled his wish. She didn't quit working. She used the money to open a small foundation in his name, helping struggling housemaids and low-income workers find safe homes, fair jobs, and education for their children. She wanted to keep his legacy alive in the best way she could. Her story began to spread, not because she wanted fame, but because people were moved by what she did. They were touched by the idea that a millionaire and a maid, two people from completely different worlds, could build such a bond through honesty and compassion. Years passed, but she never forgot him. Every year on the day of his passing, she would visit his grave, place fresh flowers, and say a few words quietly. "You changed my life," she would whisper, "and I'll keep changing others' lives for you." One evening, as the sun dipped low and golden light filled her small garden, she sat on her porch with a cup of tea. She looked at the house he had given her, the same house that had once been just a dream, and smiled. She realized something beautiful. Sometimes the greatest tests in life aren't about money or power. They're about how you treat others when no one is watching. He had tested her honesty by leaving the safe open, but in the end it was he who was tested, and through her kindness he found redemption. Their story became a quiet lesson to everyone who heard it. That even in a world filled with greed and selfishness, There are still hearts that shine with purity, and sometimes a simple act of goodness can heal a soul more deeply than any fortune ever could. As night fell, she looked up at the stars and whispered softly, "You once said I reminded you of hope, but the truth is you gave me hope too." The wind moved gently through the trees as if carrying her words into the sky, a quiet promise between two souls forever connected, not by wealth or status, but by the simple power of kindness. And in that moment, she smiled, not with sadness but with peace, knowing that even though he was gone, his spirit still lived on in every act of goodness she shared with the world.